So I'm joined here by Robin Grille in Sydney, Australia. And Robin is one of my parenting heroes. He's author of the phenomenal books Parenting for a Peaceful World and Heart to Heart Parenting. And what inspires me so much about your work, Robin, is how hopeful your message is. And I think we really need to hear your voice right now in the UK, given the recent shocking events. It's really understandable that parents are feeling frightened at the moment about the state of the world and what kind of world we're bringing our children into. And, you know, when these things happen so close to home, it really feels very bleak. And yeah, understandably, you know, many families have been affected by those who have been hurt or lost through these tragic events. So I'd really love to hear from you. I know in your book you make a strong case that globally now is the safest time we've ever lived in. I'd really love to hear more about that.
For sure, Roma. I guess, though, first of all, that what I want to acknowledge is that for the people who just lost their lives in London and Manchester and you know, also people in places like Yemen and places like Syria right now, and we're so senseless. Um, you know, for them, the world really is not feeling like the safest time, and my heart goes out to all of those people. I'm very sorry for what's happened, and what an outrage it is. What a unexplainable horror.
Yeah.
For the victims and for the families of the victims, to send someone you love away to a concert or walking down the street and that they don't come home, or that they don't come home whole. So, you know, I want to acknowledge them very much first. And yeah, I do still hear it said by so many people that, you know, there seems to be the impression, a very shared impression, that the world is becoming more and more violent and more and more violent. And, you know, it's as if we wouldn't get that impression when cameras are everywhere, and the news really feeds off that in the news cycle. And we get closer and closer to the most graphic moments of atrocity.
Yeah.
It seems to be everywhere we look. So, you know, initially it feels like counterintuitive to say that the world is becoming a less violent place. Doesn't really look that way, does it?
Sure.
But harder as it is to believe, that's actually exactly what's going on. I want to qualify that by saying that is like an average around the world. Um, Now, just pause for a moment there, Roma, because the image froze. Was the
Yeah, I just lost you again. If you could
where?
just go back to um, hard as it is to believe.
Okay, so as hard as it seems to believe. Uh, yeah, the world is actually becoming, statistically speaking, it's becoming a far less violent place. Um, but I want to point out that that's an average. So in terms of an average global statistic for all of the measures of violence, deaths and injuries caused by war, um, crime, and domestic violence, the rates of that on average are in free fall. absolutely plummeting.
Yeah.
That's, of course, not true in an even way. There are spots around the world where things seem to get worse in terms of violence.
Yeah.
But when you average all out, and there's been some very, very methodical studies going on for decades and decades, the world is becoming definitely far less human to human violence. Let's qualify it, is becoming less. Even the 20th century, with the two world wars and the apocalyptic weaponry that we seem to have developed,
Yeah.
even that was a time which was already statistically less violent than previous centuries. So you can
Right.
just imagine, as horrific as it is now,
Yeah.
with each century that you go back in time, or even every 50 years, it gets worse and worse and worse. So it's been life has been quite a bloodbath for a lot of humanity. Humanity is, in a sense, in recovery from millennia of unrelenting trauma. Unrelenting trauma and the brain changes, the severe brain changes that has causes,
Yeah.
that causes.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'll qualify that again by saying that our violence towards the natural environment, towards the non-human world, is not getting better.
Right.
We're endangering ourselves that way.
Yeah.
But there are dramatic changes in terms of human-to-human violence. So, and some phenomenal mixing of people that would have considered each other enemies before.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I imagine that you'd want me to say something about what I think is driving those changes, yeah?
Yeah. So what, keeps me going as a parent and in the work that I do with
Yeah.
parents is your extremely hopeful message about why the levels of violence have been reducing.
Yeah.
Yeah, please say more about that.
Well, if you put together a synthesis, which is what I did in my first book, Parenting for a Peaceful World, a synthesis of anthropology, um, the history of childhood, which is called psychohistory, and neuropsychology, that looks at how the brain develops, the human brain develops according to how we're treated in childhood, and epigenetics, which is the study of how childhood experiences change us at the level of our genetic expression.
Yeah.
That's absolutely wild. That is such a game changer, really, of understanding of what it is that drives the evolution and the ever-changing nature of human society. The inescapable and very, very clear pattern that comes through is that childhood changes the world. The way that we relate to children, on the whole, um, drives is the most powerful engine of what changes the future. So that as children start to be treated with less violence and less abuse in a large scale, then inescapably the next generation becomes less and less and less violent.
Yeah.
And there's definitely something that I call a children's liberation movement going on around the world, with no one particular leader, no one particular manifesto,
Mm.
and a million different faces. Most of the examples of this you'll never even find out about because it's too big. But it's quite thrilling in all of the key areas of childbirth, breastfeeding, attachment, how we set boundaries with children. Over 50 countries now where it's against the law for a parent to smack a child. It's legally termed as domestic violence in over 50 countries. And there are a further 4 or 5 countries that come online with that prohibition every year. So within your lifetime and mine, if we live to a ripe old age, it'll be the whole world. It wouldn't surprise me if the United States is not the final country to jump on board. But that's a
Mm.
whole other story. Um, and so it's been shown very, very clearly that there's a causal link and a very powerful causal relationship between when, as a nation moves forward in child rearing reform, that nation becomes more peaceful.
Yeah.
And even more peaceful towards the natural environment as well. So crime goes down, health problems go down. So many social indicators get better and better and better.
Yeah.
And there are a few countries that are at the foreground of this, that are leading the charge, notably the Nordic countries.
Yeah.
I want to stress that it's not perfect over there. It's not as if you're not going to find problems and corruptions and violence in the Nordic countries. It's certainly got their share of problems, depression, all kinds of stuff. But in social evolutionary terms, and in comparison, where Australia and the UK are, and the US and other, developed so-called democracies, they're a shining example, and a kind of a great, very undeniable evidence that as you improve on childhood, the whole world improves, the whole nation improves. Which means that to say that we can have a war in which, a world in which war no longer exists, that is anything but idealistic.
Yeah.
That's simply a very humble uh, thing to hope for.
Yeah.
It's not just achievable. It's almost inevitable in terms of the direction in which we're going. So I would say in the lifetime of your children, unless something comes in to change this rapidly accelerating pace of social evolution, that's exactly the kind of world that your children will live in. I would not advise a career in the military, because that's going to be shrinking. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you, Robin Grille. So just to summarize that, statistically, we are reaching levels of safety on the planet that we have never experienced before. And the work that you do as parents really matters. Every 5 minutes that you spend responding to your child contributes towards peace and sustainability on the planet. And those values are very much part of our mission statement at Hand in Hand Parenting. So, yeah, thank you, Robin, for sharing your hopeful and peaceful message with parents of the UK.
Roma, if I may just add a concluding remark.
Yeah.
Which is to say that my personal preference is not to leave it up to hope, because not one of the things that I've just mentioned are guaranteed, actually. Not really. That it's entirely conditional. A world of peace and harmony with the environment is completely conditional upon us continuing, as many of us as possible, continuing the work of child rearing reform, which means to say all of us doing our best to learn how to be attending to our children's emotional needs, not just their physical needs, and to become better listeners of our children, of what they say with their body language as well as what they say with their words. Listening to their hearts is the main thing. And it's conditional upon us doing that. So, yeah, I cannot promise we'll have a peaceful world. What I can promise is that it's up to you and me. And therefore, and up to parents and up to schools and up to the communities that support parents, because we can't do it without support. So that's why, to me, my feeling is that the work of a parent, a mother, a father, grandparents is the most powerful form of social activism that there is, because we are literally the farmers of the empathy level, of the empathy crop of the next generation.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so It's really nice talking with you again, Roma. Great to see you again.
Thanks so
And
much, Robin. Really appreciate your words.
lots of love to the people that have been hurt by what happened in London and Manchester. Yeah.